And now, New Galaxy Enterprises proudly presents Threshold Radio. This is Johnny Bluestar. Welcome to Threshold, a global media event. Is the universe just a random dance of atoms, or is it a manifestation of a supremely intelligent architect? Can its purpose, or our purpose here on Earth, be adequately assessed? Can we commune with it, know its intentions, cooperate with its direction? Here, we define threshold as a gateway state of awareness, allowing mankind to cross into a place of real cognition. Threshold allows us to approach questions of higher reality through the door of experience, rather than mere belief. Welcome to Threshold, where we tear away the veil from commercial media, bringing our audience and participants into another realm of reality and enhanced communication. We're back on Threshold Radio with Lenore Engelhardt, a clinical social worker who specializes in an intuitive approach to recovery from addiction, which is fueled by certain principles and understandings about addiction, which we will discuss here. Lenore has been a colleague and friend for many years, and I know the way she combines compassion, understanding, and spirituality in her approaches to her own life and to those of her clients. Welcome to Threshold Radio, Lenore.
Hello, Johnny.
I'm really glad to be talking to you again. You know, I think before we get into the program, where we will kind of focus on addiction, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into clinical social work and the type of work that you've been doing in general over the years.
Well, I think it goes back a long way. I wanted to get involved in becoming an MSW, that's a master's in social work, since I was about 21 years old. I found that this was a way for me to be able, by getting a master's degree, to help people, different people on different levels with their emotional problems. When I was very young, I found a position in Boston. This is a very interesting story, with a group, and I became a play therapist. The person who was my supervisor was 89 years old, and she actually knew Freud, and this was a very fascinating opportunity.
Wow.
Yeah.
What is play therapy, though?
Play therapy is what you do with children who are emotionally disturbed. You take them into your office and you actually play with toys and you talk to them, because you can't talk to them like an adult client, since, they're so young. And we would go in and we would color, or we would even bake a cake, or we would play with toys, and then they would tell you what is going on in their life. And so I was supervised by this woman who at the time was 89 years old. And that was kind of the beginning of my career. After that, I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I met you.
Yes, I remember.
Yes, and I was involved with the county superintendent of schools office, where I directed a drug and alcohol prevention program, and also an alternative school for teenagers who were having problems. And this was a whole county organization. We went into training with the Office of Education, who took us to various places for 2 weeks at a time around the country. And so this was great training. After that, I applied to Tulane University, where I went and got my MSW, and that's in New Orleans. So through all of this training, I decided that this was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and I have been in private practice now, worked in New Mexico, and now I'm in Atlanta, and I'm still in private practice. I've been doing this for over 25 years.
Well, that's amazing. I will say that going back into part of your past, I was part of one of those journeys that you went with Tom Summers to be in a drug workshop.
Yes.
That was quite an experience for me. Of course, that's not been the focus of my career, but I was really glad to have learned what I learned there.
Yes. And where were you? Where were we when you did that?
We went to Vail.
Okay. All right. Okay.
A long time ago.
Yes, it was quite an amazing experience, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, it really was.
Yeah.
And after that period, I did confront and meet, for various reasons, different people, some of whom I was close to, who were addicts in one way or another. And I came out of an experience where one of my friends in high school, one of my best friends, actually became a drug addict on heroin. And several people I knew had extremely traumatic and dangerous experiences because of drugs before I even met you. So it's always been on my mind.
Yeah.
Well, let's go into the nitty-gritty of it.
Okay.
Let's talk about addiction in general. Could you describe this to us?
Yes. I think that the reason it's called addiction is because it's a craving that one has no control over, whether it's alcohol, drugs, cigarettes. It can be pornography, sex, love. It's something that, you want to say to the person, well, why don't you just quit this? Well, they can't. And often the problem with it is if one doesn't get into recovery or get some help, it usually leads, as they say in AA, to insanity or death or both.
Yes, I had a partner once, one of the most intelligent people that I know. And it was sort of an advertising business. And he had been an addict, and he recovered. He used to go to regular meetings. But somehow something went wrong at some point, and he died of a heroin overdose. In other words, before, when I had known him, less than a year before that, he seemed to be fine. But I don't think he kept up the need to have help on a regular basis.
Well, that's a very sad story. And I think that considering what goes on with addiction, some of the things that most people know about, they understand that certain celebrities and musicians oftentimes die of an overdose. And I think it's because they cannot deal with the fame that has hit them suddenly. I'll give examples. We're now back in older days of Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix. All of these people were extremely talented, but they were addicted to various substances.
Yeah,
and couldn't stop.
Yeah, it seems like sometimes the material answer to happiness, even for the ordinary person, is just not satisfying, because the happiness that you really get comes from a very deep sense within yourself, I think. And these things kind of substitute for that inner experience, and they blot it out like clouds covering the sun. And the person has to have these things in order to feel that they're alive.
Yes, I think what you're talking about, I would put it a bit differently. There is a very deep emptiness in the individual that they are trying to fill. The problem with it is, especially with drugs and alcohol, that emptiness, you take the drug, you feel like you're in a kind of a state of ecstasy, and then it's gone. And the only way you can get that back is to keep doing it. And that's why it becomes this kind of vicious cycle.
Well, you see, in my case, I actually know a lot of people who didn't really recover, or if they recovered, it was tremendously hard. And in general, because I have seen some disastrous things happen to different people, not just the people I mentioned, is recovery easy or possible? Or what would denote the possibility for an addict to recover?
Well, the first step is motivation. Without motivation, nothing's going to happen. Another person can't make another person get into recovery, which often happens, say, in a marital situation where the spouse is alcoholic, the other one wants that person to recover. But the person has got to want to recover. Often it involves hitting bottom, which means you've lost everything. You could lose your job, your partner, your money, everything. And then finally it hits you between the eyes that you better do something, because the next thing that's going to happen is you're going to die.
Yeah.
Literally die.
And I have met people like that at those last stages. And some of them, particularly one I'm thinking of, did not necessarily recover at all. And some of them, as I said, have died. So it's not a joke, especially if you care about a person like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the first step is motivation, and which may come under traumatic circumstances.
Yes, you know what? Let me say something else. Besides motivation, there is something before that, which is recognition, because addiction is all about denial. We're going to pretend that there is no problem, that we're not going to notice the elephant in the room. And this is what often happens in alcoholic families. The addict is there getting, we'll just say, drunk all the time. And the wife is picking up the pieces, or maybe if there is no wife at that point, the older child becomes the parental child, takes care of the younger ones, and that's what happens in families.
Do you think that the conditions in our society, various elements of those conditions, encourage or push addiction?
Absolutely.
Tell us about it.
Okay, I think that, well, you know, if you even just watch TV, you look at these beautiful models, whether they're male or female, or even looking at a magazine, looking anywhere at a billboard, you know, it's almost like the only people that exist are 30 years old or younger, and it's kind of a cult of beauty. Well, most people cannot aspire to that, and so they feel bad about themselves. I think low self-esteem is a big piece of this, and they're trying to comfort themselves in some way because either, you know, they don't think they're good enough, they didn't get the job, they don't have a decent relationship, and so the only thing that looks promising is a drug or alcohol.
You know, that's one problem with media, but I think I detect another one, Lenore. I don't know if you'll agree with me or not.
What's
but
that?
I watch a lot of series, you know, these new series that are on Netflix or Hulu, and
yes,
mainly because I write in this genre. You know, movies or some TV pilots, so I'm very interested in this genre. But
yes.
I noticed something about them. Number one, a lot of the ones that are really popular, and I have to tell you, I self-censor when I watch these things.
Yes, so do I.
so first of all, they have a lot of sexuality, very graphic, and sometimes, you know, rather perverted. I mean, you know, like for instance, in Billions, that was a popular one recently. They'll have a lot of S&M. Or they'll have all kinds of sexuality and very explicit, and then of course very loveless in a lot of ways. Or very, you know, the people who are interacting are not interacting in a very loving way. Another thing that they do is they push violence to a point where people who would normally have at least some kind of conscience about violence, in other words, create a protagonist who is very good in many ways and then have them kill somebody accidentally or do something extremely sadistic, including the kind of superhero shows that are on that are sometimes amazing, because I think that kids really are not watching them at all because they are so filled with violence and sexuality. So I think that creates an environment where your happiness is supplied. You're looking for a kind of happiness and entertainment, and you're really being kind of programmed into despair.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, listen, Lenore, we're going to take a break for a second, and we will be right back.
Okay.
Thank you. Often recovery from addiction, acute depression, or anger involves a level of seemingly spiritual intervention. You can find this modality in Stephanie's song, Close to Death.
Did not see a shining light, I only saw the dark. Is it because that I am cursed and the devil's left his mark? Or is it I'm given a second chance to turn my life around, to reach the light that's there for me and rise up from the ground? Or I did feel someone kiss me up tall, but you must not work against me, for then you will just fall, then you will just fall, then you will just fall. So wake up now and use the talents I have given you. Embrace the light that I will send, and I'll be there for you. I'll be there for you. I'll be there for you. So wake up now and use the talents I have given you. Embrace the light that I will send, and I'll be there for you. I'll be there for you. I'll be there for you. Now I see my future, and it's looking much more bright. I'm glad that I have stood up and embraced the gleaming light. Embrace the gleaming light. Embrace the gleaming light.
Well, Lenore, we've been talking about addiction and about social conditions, the social elements that push addiction. But let's look at it from another point. How does a person become empowered and be able to leave the syndrome of addiction?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and it kind of brings us back to what we were saying earlier about, I think they have to get sick and tired of it.
Yeah.
And it's, when a person is in so much denial about how it's affecting them, how it's affecting the family, it can be really, really bad. And the problem is I keep talking about families because the whole family is wrapped up in this. There is a Netflix series called Shameless. William Macy is the star of it, and he is the alcoholic. It takes place in Chicago. There's a lot of sexuality in that as well. But the older daughter, mother has disappeared, is I'm going to use the word now, codependent in the family and the parental child. She takes care of everybody, thus enabling the father, who is Macy, to drink. And, it's not like she's encouraging him to drink, but he drinks. They show him sleeping on the floor. He is a total, if I can say, a loser as far as helping the family. He takes his Social Security check, he's on disability, and goes and spends it, and the kids are sort of on their own. But it's a very good series in terms of what an alcoholic family looks like.
I have to say that he is a very good actor.
Yes.
I haven't seen that. I didn't know he was in it, so I'll be I'll be looking at it with my eyes half closed once in a while.
Check it out, and he also, I understand, lives in Atlanta, so yeah.
Oh, we'll say hello.
But, in the alcoholic family, we have a series of people. Would you like me to talk about that?
Yes, and particularly to go a little bit more into what codependency is.
Yes. Well, codependency has to do, let's just use it in terms of a spouse who allows the alcoholic to continue his or her problem, the drinking. They will go to work, keep the house clean, pay all the bills, hope everything looks good, not tell the neighbors. And that is a classic example of someone who we would use the phrase enabling the spouse to drink.
Yeah.
So that's the definition of codependency.
Well, I think there are reasons for it, right? Why would a person do that? I mean, do they do it out of ignorance, or do they do it because they don't feel they can do anything else, because they have a person who's kind of helpless? Or
Right. Well, I think that there's a number of reasons. Oftentimes, codependency can be considered like a addiction. The person is addicted to the addict acting out, and that's the reason that they do this kind of thing. I know it doesn't make any sense, but they oftentimes are afraid of being by themselves, even though they're involved with a very sick individual, and they just keep this going. I mean, I've known people, for example, in Al-Anon, which is the sister organization of AA, a number of the spouses, oftentimes women, have been with that person for 40 years.
Wow.
And they don't leave. Sometimes it might be a situation where the addict is working, let's say it's the husband, but he's functional. He goes to work, but he drinks. And so she doesn't leave because of children and finances. That's kind of more, a number of years ago that was going on. Things have changed now.
Well, another point that I wanted to ask you about was, we've been talking about some of these social factors, but how about personal problems that result in depression and, chronic anxiety? Do these things lead to addiction?
That's a very good point. Or we might say that the addiction leads to the depression and chronic anxiety.
Right.
It kind of both, I think it goes both ways. Because, alcohol, is we can look at it as a chemical imbalance, because sometimes there's a phrase called self-medicating. A person is depressed, and so they drink to feel better. However, unfortunately, alcohol is a depressant, and so the person becomes more depressed. The same thing with drugs. People are using it to feel better, but in the long run, it makes the situation worse.
Well, speaking of addiction in the family that we were mentioning, like a codependent situation, what happens emotionally to children who are raised in a family where addiction is prevalent?
Well, there are different personalities in a family, and it's interesting how it works. I'll just name some of them. One of the children may become the overachiever or the family hero. I was raised in an alcoholic family. My father functioned and he worked, but he did drink. And so I see myself, I kind of became the family hero because we could look at the fact that I got into the field of helping, and because I came out of an alcoholic family. Now, there's also other children in the family may become, one might be the family mascot. He's always making jokes and being silly at school and often doesn't do his work. Another part of the family, another family member may become the rebel and just follow in the addict's footsteps. And so, it's a real kind of a mix that goes on there. Okay,
so somebody comes to you out of, maybe they're codependent, and they're coming to you, to a family that's in this type of shape because one or both of the adults are addicted, or maybe a child is addicted.
Yes.
How do you handle that?
Well, one of the things that I do, because I'm thinking of particular clients that I have now, and by the way, it doesn't matter if they're 25 or 65. Sometimes the older ones still have the memory of the alcoholic father, and their whole approach to life has been to try to rescue that individual. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. The alcoholic father could be dead, but that person, I'm just going to use an example of, let's take a woman, and this is not a real person, I'm making up a scenario, but that person has married or been with a number of partners throughout her life, usually picking someone who is an addict or disturbed or abusive in some way. Often addicts are abusive, either verbally or physically, and continues to go from one relationship to the next. And so they are stuck in a situation not only of rescuing, but of being addicted, looking for love, as they say, in all the wrong places.
Right.
Yeah. I hope that's helpful.
Well, but what actually do you do with the person? I mean, How does the therapy work, especially in relationship to a family situation? What do you advise them? How do you handle it?
What I do is, first of all, we have to explore the whole situation. If there is an actual addict in the situation who is abusing the codependent, you have to build the codependent's self-esteem so that person can actually leave the situation. Or give the addict an ultimatum: I'm going to leave you if you don't change, which often gets that person into some kind of rehab program and on the road to recovery.
That's like a tough love situation, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But the codependent can be in as much denial as the addict, and that's why they're kind of doing this dance together. So I want to help both people get their lives together. Of course, let's say the codependent is my client. I don't really have influence over the addict, but through the codependent, as I said, she can get her life together and recognize the pattern that she's in.
How do you directly or indirectly deal with the children in that family, say, if a husband or wife comes to you as a codependent or as an addict? How do you influence the restoration of or normalization of the family?
Well, I would have to tell the codependent that unless, she either leaves the family and gets healthy herself, not the family, leaves the spouse and gets healthy herself, the children are not going to get healthy. So, that has to happen. Or, we could also do family counseling, which I do, and get everyone in there to confront and make an intercession with the addict himself.
So what's your experience with the success of that?
Well, I guess I'd say my experience depends on the person being willing to change. And usually when someone arrives at my office, they are willing to make the change. But it's a really tough situation.
So you have actually seen people, I guess, recover fairly completely, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Well, that must be very satisfying.
Yes. Oftentimes when I have people coming to me, let's say addicts, we'll call them, who are in recovery already, then they have made the decision to recover. Of course, sometimes, and I've had this happen too, sometimes people will step back into the addiction for a time, but usually they will come back out of it. So if that happens, you have to just give them the space to figure it out and come back.
Right, because they have bottomed out and then they've come back and they re-experience some of the things that they know are going to lead to something else, and they finally make a more permanent move, right? Yes.
Now, I do want to say this. Sometimes one of the problems, let's say in the alcoholic family, is that not only do we have the drugs and or alcohol going on, but we have love addiction. The codependent is addicted to the addict because they feel so bad about themselves. They want to be loved by someone, so they'll just take, crumbs from the addict and try to make everything look good because they're so fearful of leaving and finding themselves empty emotionally.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Lenore, we're going to take another break now.
Okay.
And come back, and we're going to talk about one of the more tremendous forms of addiction that we have in our society, namely food.
Oh, okay.
We'll be right back. Here's a clip of a song written by myself and Russian composer Edgar Ahrens for an album developed with singer Patricia Welch called Desperate Games.
Your shadow marks the brazen breeze. I sense you near and slowly freeze, tempted by your lips and your touch. The cup of you is way too much. I drink from you in sleep, in dreams, and mourn your loss in muffled screams.
Well, we're back again on Threshold Radio with Lenore Engelhardt, a clinical social worker, and we're discussing recovery, and of course, we're also discussing addiction. It's a very, very interesting subject, and one of the things, though, about addiction, Lenore, is that a lot of people are addicted to something in this culture, and it's related to food. And I would say that among those people, there's a large percentage who have no idea that they're addicted because they live on addictive substances that are very, very bad for them.
Yes, I agree.
One of them that's obvious to me is sugar.
Yes.
The sugar blues. So tell us about it.
Well, I think that we can call it sugar and or both carbohydrates.
Right.
And most people are just completely unconscious of what they are buying and what they are eating. So this is what is the major cause of obesity in our society. I want to also connect this with depression. When people come in, especially women, I like to ask them, hey, what did you eat in the last few days? And they'll talk about all the carbs that they had. I'm not hearing a lot about fish or meat or vegetables or anything like this.
I want to make a point.
Yes,
I'd like to make a point here because people talk about carbs, and there's two kinds of carbs. There's simple carbohydrates like particularly with flour or sugar, and then there's complex carbohydrates like carrots and broccoli. And we're not when we say carbs in the way this context, we're really talking about things that are usually highly glycemic and
highly glycemic,
cause a spike in insulin in the blood. And when that happens, there's all kinds of reactions to it. And these things are generally speaking, these high glycemic carbs are very addictive.
Yes, they are. They're very addictive. There is one way to get around the addiction, however, and I don't want to get into a whole different food plans, but the Paleo / Primal diet involves avoiding sugar and avoiding the carbohydrates like flour, anything. Let's just call it anything white. Okay, that makes it easier. White flour, white potatoes, white rice, white bread, even though they also avoid some of the whole grain breads. But anything white, including white sugar, people want to avoid. Just doing that would make a big difference in people's moods.
Now, actually, being very experienced about this, that ain't so easy.
No, it's not.
I mean, I would say that for me, I know many people who struggle every day because they go through these diets, and you say, well, they're going through these diets to lose weight. Well, they're not only trying to lose weight, they're trying to regain their health.
Yes.
I mean, I had an experience where I was truly dying of asthma, and I actually at the time, in another context, worked for one of the leading authors on holistic medicine, although I didn't pay any attention to what he was teaching. Wound up in New Orleans, thinking that the weather would cure my asthma, and I went into air panic as soon as I got off the plane, and wound up meeting somebody in a health food store that said to me that, asthma, that's nothing. I cured somebody of leukemia last year, something like that.
Wow.
And showed me some kind of newspaper article. And she gave me, I didn't believe her at all, but I was so sick, I came back and I asked her, what are you talking about? And she put me on a mucusless diet, which is a teaching of Arnold Ehret, a really old, probably somewhat non-scientific approach to these problems. And my asthma went away. The chronic symptoms went away in 3 days. And I could breathe again. I couldn't take a quarter of a teaspoon of sugar, though, which was against the rules, for a year without tremendous problems. The whole thing coming back again. But I did. I now have been cured for, 30 or 40 years, something like that. And so it actually meant something. And I was definitely addicted to sugar. But I kind of bottomed out because I saw that I was dying.
Yes, that's quite a story, and that's amazing. But let me also add that this is what people don't know when they go on a quote-unquote diet. That's why I'm interested in this kind of, there's a diet out there called a ketogenic, and there's also one called paleo, as I mentioned earlier. But the key to these diets is to eat enough fat, which people are terrified of if they're on a diet. But the truth is, fat does not make you fat. So if you eat coconut oil, olive oil, any of fish oil, any of the good oils, you can eat as much as you want of it, and it will satisfy you so that you will not have the sugar craving. And I think that's a very important piece that usually nobody seems to recognize.
How does paleo deal with that?
With the fat?
Yeah.
Well, they suggest, not only eating the protein as far as fish and meat and lots of vegetables, talking about the broccoli, carrot kind of vegetables, and adding the coconut oil. And, there are things that one can have. For example, you can have a chocolate that's 70% chocolate, and it's not going to trigger the sugar. So you can get real creative with some of these things.
Well,
so they add the fat. They add the fat is my point.
I see. Well, I noticed, we were talking before about the highs that you get on these various obvious substances like alcohol and drugs.
Yes.
But people don't realize, and except people are awakened to this already, how incredibly powerful effect sugar, for one thing, has on your moods, on your feeling of well-being. I mean, so do other things like coffee, caffeine. I mean, these things are really powerful drugs, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
And like everything else, whenever you go up unnaturally, in a sense, you come down quite hard. And so there's a connection between sugar, carbs, and depression, right?
Yes. And I also think that as one gets older, if you want to remain healthy, you need to get off of these substances.
Yeah, I still, I'm on a pretty strict diet. I try to be on a very strict diet. But when I go out, the other day I went out to a fairly famous restaurant, not a fast food restaurant, but a dining restaurant. And where they serve a lot of salad, but they also serve breadsticks. They also serve a lot of cheese and a lot of other types of. So it's like it has a sort of appearance of health, but for me, it wasn't really very healthy. And so it's really hard to socialize when you're trying to deal with these problems. You have to be extremely careful, when you say?
Yes, you do. One of the things, though, that people recommend, some of the quote-unquote experts in these fields, is that you take one day a week and go ahead and eat whatever you want on that day, but not do it on the other days. Now, if you're really sick, of course, you can't do that. But that way you feel like, okay, I've had a little bit of pasta or I've had a little bit of bread. And there are many, many ways to get around these things. I'm also doing a diet similar to what you are, and learning a lot about how to make desserts, how to make breads. All of these things are gluten-free.
You have to almost develop your own food culture.
Yes.
Because you can't, where I am, there's virtually no restaurant that serves, for instance, raw food. There's no raw food restaurant that's not even heard of here. And so some of the restaurants or the buffets, they do have some good things. But another thing that you have to watch out for, and this is maybe a little bit of digression, are GMOs. Because you don't know what's actually in these foods. And besides the sugar and the carbs and all that, there's also all kinds of chemicals, preservatives, pesticides, traces of antibiotics and so forth, hormones in these foods. And so it's almost when I was saying having your own food culture, you actually have to create as much organic produce as you can. Yes. You have to wash everything. And then when it comes to meat, if you're going to be a meat eater, there's a lot of really bad stuff in meat. So you have to find meat that's often quite expensive in order to, or go to a farm directly.
Yes, grass-fed, pasture-fed butter. It really does. It takes a commitment. As we were talking about a person who's addicted to a drug or alcohol, this takes as much of a commitment to make a decision to do it this way because you feel better.
Yeah.
So when we talk about eating disorders, which we haven't really mentioned in the terms of clinical, someone who is anorexic or bulimic, that means someone who basically is starving themselves to death or throwing up after they binge. that's kind of a little bit of a different story. But it really is, it's very complicated, and we won't get into that, I'm sure, today, but I'm just saying that there are all kinds of eating disorders out there. And most of the people we meet, don't think of themselves as having an eating disorder. They're just eating what's out there in the grocery store.
Well, Lenore, we probably have only touched on this, and I hope someday you'll come back and we can talk a little bit more about recovery and the different kinds of addiction. But we have at least focused on one that I would wager that 80% of the people listening to this program probably have or are struggling with, the food addiction. But,
absolutely.
But before we go, I'd like you to give us some information about how people could contact you. Do you do this work, your clinical work like this, over the phone ever at a distance?
Yes, I do Skype sessions, and that's, Skype sessions with a video. And also, people can contact me, and I can, do you want me to give you a number?
Oh, definitely. Give us all the contact information.
As I said, I'm in Atlanta, and I work with all kinds of people who call me, and, in these various fields. This is the whole addictive kind of thing is my specialty. I do a lot of work with women who have been sexually abused, who are dealing with love addiction, who come out of these kinds of families, who have been traumatized. Why don't I just put it that way? I also work with gay and lesbian, transgendered population, and have done so for years. So right now, you can reach me by calling my number, which is 404-212-0792, or sending me an email, and my email is Lenore, Lenore, Engelhardt, Engelhardt, @gmail.com.
Could you repeat your phone number again?
Yes, 404-212-0792.
Lenore, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. And, part of Threshold Radio is meant to try and empower our listeners. We handle all kinds of controversial and, spiritually, politically, socially, personally types of things. But there is a belief that people need to be empowered in order to face the world that they live in today, and not just empowered for themselves, but to empowered to help others. And I think you've made a big contribution to our empowerment series.
Well, thank you. That is really my goal in my therapy practice, is to empower others.
Well, thank you for coming, and we hope to be in touch with you soon.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you for having me, Johnny.
Quite welcome. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
It is now time to hear from Dr. Hugo Rodier, MD, who regularly brings to us his insights and wisdom from the forward-looking integrative medical perspective.
Hi, Johnny. Today I have a great article that came out in the New York Times, September 12th, in fact. It's a review of an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, saying that for decades, the sugar industry has been paying the media, scientists, colleges about keeping quiet on how toxic refined sugars are, particularly for the heart. Now, I've known this for quite a while, but I've never seen it so widely open and so clearly told by the powers that be. And this is great for consumers. We have known that sugar is extremely toxic, but Big Sugar, as it's called, has been hiding the evidence that they have manipulated science and bought influence so that people keep eating sugar. And then they blame fat. They say, oh, don't eat cholesterol, take cholesterol drugs. But really, it's about sugar. We've talked about this before, how sugar messes with the liver, of course, every organ. But in messing with the liver, it messes with how we process cholesterol. So cholesterol has never been the problem. It's sugar and how cholesterol is processed in the liver, which is not done well because of the impact of sugar on the liver. A lot of people have fatty liver. I'll never forget how a cardiologist wagged his finger in my face saying that diet and sugar had nothing to do with heart disease or any disease for that matter. Oh, Hugo, let them drink their soda pop. It's just amazing how the industry has worked against our better interests.
How have they been able to disguise this material?
Well, they have paid those people that should have been watching out, looking out for us. And so please look it up, New York Times, September 12th, or go to the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, for the month of September.
Dr. Rodier works out of his own integrative health clinic in Draper, Utah. Although he, of course, takes office visits, he also schedules consultations on the phone. For complete contact information and to read his blogs, newsletters, hear his podcasts, and buy his books, go to hugorodier.com. That's HUGORODIER.com. hugorodier.com. The Spy Files is another riveting component of Kenneth Eads' Brent Marks legal thriller series. When Michael Fine, a young journalist, asked Brent Marks to assist him in a Freedom of Information request, classified documents are accidentally released to him by the FBI. When they're not returned, there's big legal trouble afoot for him and for his attorney, who are facing criminal prosecution. The story, however, starts off with a murder. Here's an excerpt.
The Spy Files by Kenneth Ead. Read by Maxwell Zener. When Chan approached the lab, he could see that the lights were on. That's strange. I'm sure I turned them off. Maybe it's the janitor. He unlocked the lab door and startled the man who was sitting at his station. Chan's monitor was illuminated. What are you doing there? The man rose from his seat and looked to his right and then to his left, deciding whether to run or stand his ground. Chan approached him. I'm calling security. You shouldn't be here. Just back off, Chinaman, and I won't have to hurt you. Chan put his right hand on his stun gun, searching for the nerve. With his left hand, he picked up the phone and started to punch in the number for security with his thumb. Put it down, Chinaman. Chan looked up to see the man pointing a gun right at him. He set down the phone slowly. You're going to shoot me? Just walk away and nobody gets hurt. Just walk away. You didn't see anything. Chan took 2 paces back. He bent to pick up his briefcase. Leave it. Just keep moving. Chan let go of the handle of the briefcase. The man approached him slowly. Chan took another 2 steps back, and the man took several steps forward. Chan put his hand on the door, and the man gently pushed him through it. Taking his chance, Chan rotated, slammed the taser against the man's body, and let it rip. The man dropped the gun and staggered back, bracing himself against a table. Chan came back into the lab and lunged for his briefcase. With a surge of energy and anger, the man tackled Chan, slamming him back against a lab table. Chan fell hard, hitting his head. Chan lay there still. The man panicked and felt his carotid artery. There was no pulse. Oh, shit. What a mess. He pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. From The Spy Files by Kenneth Ead. Read by Maxwell Zener.
Here's one of my favorite Zave and Bonnie songs, I Am French.
Yo, man, check it out.
Hey, look at that.
Yeah, man, this dude looks weird,
Yeah, he's
man.
kinda weird.
Is he from Mars or France or what?
France.
Yeah, man, where's this dude been shopping at?
You think he's cute? Sir, this is your communication from Paris.
Oh, merci beaucoup, merci. I just arrived from Paris today with no reason but chercher la femme. I got my clothes, my face, I feel so debonair. Hey, comment allez-vous, monsieur, madame? And here I am, just a stranger in the streets of LA, looking out for something to do. And I say, hey, how you doing? I gotta show you something, cause I wanna be your baby of you. Because I'm French. Everything is possible entre nous. Because I'm French. Ça doit marcher between me and you. You know I'm French. Everything is possible entre nous. You know I'm French. Ça doit marcher between me and you. Yeah.
Man, this dude is cool.
like a child in a toy store. I think I want more, cause she talks about men à chaque trois. Oh, she wants love, I'm ready to play the part. Go for it, c'est la vie, pourquoi pas? Oh, she wants to see my savoir-faire, I'm not opposed, bien au contraire. I'm gonna have to sing her toujours l'amour. She said,
Too sweet, I wanna feel a little bit
of love à la française, merci, bonjour. Because I'm French, everything is possible entre nous. You know I'm French, ça doit marcher between me and you. Because I'm French, everything is possible entre nous. You know I'm French, ça doit marcher between me and you. Mademoiselle, so what's your name?
Baba?
Ooh, you've gotta be my soup du jour. I wanna kiss ton petit four. Ouh là là! Entre nous, you know I'm French, ça doit marcher between me and you. Because I'm French, everything is possible entre nous. You know I'm French, ça doit marcher between me and you. You know I'm French, everything is possible entre nous. You know I'm French, ça doit marcher between me and you. Because I'm French. Oui, oui.